Canada and the United States had a relationship built up over decades that the U.S. decided unilaterally to change. They didn't consult us. This wasn't a discussion, negotiation. They unilaterally changed it. We're not even going to sign a good deal. We're going to sign a great deal for Canada. And yes, we can give ourselves more than the Americans can take away.
Prime Minister Mark Carney just did what many Canadians have quietly wanted from their leader for years. He looked straight into the camera on one of the biggest media platforms in the country and said out loud what most politicians only whisper behind closed doors. During a tense and unusually candid interview with Toronto Life, Carney exposed the way Donald Trump pressures Canada, how the relationship has shifted permanently, and why this country must now stand on its own feet like never before. It was calm, it was controlled, and yet it felt like the verbal equivalent of a thunderclap. This was Carney at his sharpest, not angry, not emotional, but absolutely immovable. And in doing so, he delivered a message that resonated with millions across the country. Canada is not a junior partner. Canada is not a bargaining chip, and Canada is definitely not anyone's 51st state. The interview landed at a tense moment in Canada-U.S. relations, with Trump's second-term White House expanding tariffs and reshaping cross-border trade. New duties, including the 25% tariff on medium and heavy-duty trucks that took effect on November 1st, have already hit Ontario's auto sector and pushed the Bank of Canada to downgrade growth forecasts. Against this backdrop, Carney sat down with Toronto Life and spoke with unusual candor. He revealed that he and Trump text directly, describing late-night messages written in all caps and the president's habit of applying pressure at every opportunity. Carney emphasized that Trump negotiates by pushing hard on leverage points, something Canada must understand but no longer accept as normal. Then came the line that has already gone viral across Canadian social media. When Carney was asked about Trump's repeated jokes that Canada should one day become America's 51st state, the Prime Minister did not flinch. His answer was simple, firm, and delivered with the kind of national confidence that stays with you long after you hear it. Never, never, ever.
We are not the state there. He wishes that we would be part of the United States. And as I said in the Oval Office, when he said, never say never, I said, never, never, ever.
Carney's interview marks a turning point, not just between him and Trump, but in how Canada sees itself in relation to its massive neighbor. For nearly 4 decades, from the 1980s free trade era to the early 2020s, Canada and the United States grew closer and closer, building supply chains, integrating industries, and relying on the assumption that the border was no longer a political fault line, but an economic bridge. Carney made it unmistakably clear that those days are over. The United States, he said, unilaterally changed the relationship. They did not consult Canada, they did not negotiate the shift, they simply imposed it. And that means Canada has to adapt. According to Carney, 85% of Canadian trade remains tariff-free, the lowest average tariff exposure of any country trading with the U.S., but the era of automatic goodwill is gone. Canada must now negotiate from a position of strategic self-interest, not nostalgia for a friendlier past. This is not anti-American sentiment. This is Canada waking up to reality. Carney is effectively telling Canadians that reliance is no longer a strategy. Resilience is. And the sooner Canada builds its own economic engine, housing, energy, AI, ports, manufacturing, the sooner it can negotiate with the U.S. as an equal rather than a dependent. One of the most striking parts of the interview was how Carney described Trump's style without ever resorting to insult. He acknowledged Trump's skill, his experience, and his understanding of power. But through understated and diplomatic language, Carney revealed exactly how Trump operates: identify a pressure point, hit it hard, and keep pushing until the other side feels the squeeze. Carney's response is a contrast in leadership styles. Trump pressures, Carney prepares. Trump improvises, Carney strategizes. Trump sends all-caps texts in the middle of the night. Carney builds 25-year plans for national housing, clean energy, and industrial independence. The interview exposed not only Trump's behavior, but also Canada's new posture, steady, disciplined, and unwilling to be knocked off balance. And that is why the never, never, ever line landed so powerfully. Carney didn't just reject the idea of Canada being absorbed by the U.S. He rejected the mindset of inferiority that Trump's rhetoric relies on. It was a sovereignty moment, one that reminded Canadians of the quiet strength embedded in the national character. Beneath the political tension, Carney tapped into something deeper, a sense of national pride that often goes unstated. He pointed out that Canada is one of the most admired countries on Earth, a place people choose, not a place that needs validation from any foreign president. By highlighting Canada's diversity, stability, and social generosity, Carney reframed the conversation away from Trump's bravado and toward Canada's values that cannot be traded, bought, or bullied. This is why the interview resonated so intensely. It wasn't about attacking the U.S., it was about defending Canada, and doing so with the confidence of a country that knows exactly who it is.
Carney also used the interview to outline his long-term vision. He described a country preparing for the largest nation-building era in a generation. 65,000 new homes in Downsview, new transit links, massive clean energy projects, a national industrial strategy built around AI, and partnerships across Asia and Europe to reduce economic dependence on America. This is not rhetorical flourish. This is a plan shaped by necessity. As U.S. tariffs become more unpredictable and global rivalries intensify, Canada needs to diversify, innovate, and build, not react. Carney's comments make it clear that Canada's future strength will come from its ability to chart its own path rather than follow the gravitational pull of American politics.
Carney's interview was not a spectacle, it was not a rant, it was the opposite, a calm articulation of sovereignty at a moment when Canada needed clarity more than comfort. By exposing the pressures from Washington, naming the reality of a changed relationship, and reminding Canadians of their own national identity, Carney delivered one of the most important political messages of his premiership. The question now is whether Canada can move fast enough to match the scale of this new era, to build the housing, energy systems, technology sectors, and trade partnerships that will secure its future. Trump will continue to apply pressure. The U.S. will continue to act in its own interest. But Canada, for the first time in a long time, seems ready to respond on its own terms. And after watching Carney on that stage, one thing is clear. This is not a country that bends. This is a country that builds. It was a moment that few in Washington expected to see. As Prime Minister Mark Carney stepped onto the red carpet in Kuala Lumpur, ASEAN leaders rose to greet him with applause. Cameras captured a rare sight: Canada at the center of an Asian summit, welcomed not as a visitor, but as a partner. For months, the United States had been raising tariffs, tightening borders, and warning its allies to follow suit. Yet here was Canada, doing the opposite, expanding outward, talking trade, energy, and cooperation. What happened in Malaysia was more than a diplomatic stop. It was a declaration that Canada intends to shape its own future, even if that future no longer revolves around Washington.
We laid out last week that we want to increase our non-U.S. exports by 50% within the next decade, shorter time frame than that. It's about $300 billion to give context to that.
That's a good thing for Canadians to understand, that we're not just on bended knee hoping that Donald Trump will stop doing things that don't make any sense. We're not going to rely on the Americans anymore because they've turned out to be very unreliable, at least under the current administration. So
Carney's trip to Asia was his first as Prime Minister, and he chose the ASEAN Summit in Malaysia for a reason. Canada wanted to send a clear message. It is ready to engage directly with the fastest-growing region on Earth. The reception could not have been warmer. Regional newspapers described Canada as a dependable new voice in an uncertain world. In the summit hall, delegates highlighted Canada's consistent support for a rules-based system and fair trade. It was a contrast to the transactional tone that has defined U.S. policy in recent years. ASEAN represents a market of more than 650 million people and a combined GDP exceeding $4 trillion. According to the International Monetary Fund, the region is projected to grow around 4.5% in 2025, making it a crucial partner for any nation seeking long-term economic stability. For Canada, which still sends roughly 75% of its exports to the United States, Statistics Canada 2024, the opportunity was obvious. Carney framed the visit as a turning point, a chance for Canada to connect its advanced industries with Asia's demand for energy, minerals, and technology. He described Canada as a nation that shares ASEAN's values of inclusivity and sustainability. Behind the diplomatic language was a simple truth: Canada was ready to diversify, and Asia was ready to welcome it.
Carney laid out a measurable plan. Within 10 years, Canada aims to double its non-US exports by 300 billion Canadian dollars, much of it from Asia. The foundation is energy and innovation. Canada is one of the world's top LNG producers, projected to export 50 million tons annually by 2030. Meanwhile, 85% of its power grid is clean, with expansion focused on small modular nuclear reactors and renewables by 2035. Canada is also advancing in critical minerals through a critical mineral alliance linking its vast resources to Asian demand. The 2025 federal budget pledged to quadruple defense and tech spending over 5 years, prioritizing AI, cybersecurity, and advanced manufacturing. Together, these measures form an industrial strategy that combines energy security, clean technology, and digital strength into one national vision.
While Carney was being toasted in Kuala Lumpur, the atmosphere in Washington was tense. President Trump had just threatened another round of 10% tariffs on Canadian imports, citing unfair trade practices. The intention was to pressure Ottawa into compliance. Instead, it triggered something else: acceleration. Canada's pivot to Asia has become a direct response to the very trade barriers meant to contain it. When the U.S. closed its doors, Canada opened new ones. Trade analysts from the Peterson Institute in Washington noted in early October 2025 that tariff escalation is diverting investment and supply chains toward non-U.S. partners. That shift is already visible in the data. According to Global Affairs Canada, exports to Indo-Pacific economies reached 261 billion Canadian dollars in 2024, and new agreements signed with the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and now ASEAN could raise that number by hundreds of billions more within a decade. Every deal reduces the share of Canadian trade tied to the U.S. market. For Washington, this was never part of the plan. Trump's America First approach was supposed to strengthen the U.S. position within North America. Instead, it weakened it. By relying on tariffs as leverage, the administration pushed allies to seek alternatives. The result? Canada is no longer the quiet neighbor adapting to U.S. rules. It is emerging as an independent trade power with its own network across the Pacific.
Carney's vision defines Canada as a nation connecting Western systems with Asia's fast-growing markets. This approach is already reflected in policy. Canada's trade frameworks mix Western transparency with Asian flexibility, supporting carbon pricing and clean energy standards while offering financing models suited to ASEAN economies. By stepping into this space, Canada fills a gap left by Washington's retreat. Leaders across Asia see Ottawa as modern, predictable, and open to practical cooperation. The challenge now is to balance principles with pragmatism, a balance that makes Canada newly relevant in 2025.
The symbolism of this trip resonated far beyond Asia. In Europe, financial newspapers described it as Canada's diplomatic breakout. In Ottawa, economists pointed out that the strategy mirrors global trends: diversification, regional blocs, and the rise of mid-sized powers shaping their own paths. The Financial Times reported on October 24th that Carney's Indo-Pacific initiative could attract over 500 billion Canadian dollars in combined public and private investment over the next decade. That figure aligns with Ottawa's internal projection of a $500 billion growth plan, an ambitious but realistic target given Asia's scale. These moves are changing how global investors see Canada. Once considered an extension of the U.S. economy, it is now viewed as a Pacific gateway for Western capital. The Toronto Stock Exchange's index of resource and tech firms has outperformed the S&P 500 since mid-2025, partly due to optimism over Asian demand for Canadian minerals, energy, and clean tech components. Every handshake in Kuala Lumpur and every announcement in Singapore sends the same message: Canada intends to lead through partnership, not confrontation.
As the ASEAN summit concluded, Carney stood alongside regional leaders beneath the bright stage lights, smiling as the cameras flashed. It was more than a photo opportunity. It was the image of a country quietly transforming its role in the world. Back in Washington, the reaction was muted but unmistakable. Commentators on major networks admitted that America's tariff strategy might have backfired. Canada, once seen as a secondary player, had turned adversity into opportunity. The shift is profound. By choosing collaboration over conflict, Canada has begun to build a new identity, one grounded in confidence, partnership, and independence. It is no longer waiting for permission to act on the world stage. In 2025, while America isolates itself behind its own barriers, Canada is walking into Asia's open doors. The question now is not whether this pivot will succeed, but how far it can go. Because in the global race for influence, this may be the year when Canada finally stops following and starts leading.
Tonight, the man who has reshaped the world order, for better or worse, entered the history books, touching down at Stansted to become the first ever president to have the red carpet rolled out twice for a state visit.
President Donald Trump arrived in Britain this week with the kind of ceremony that few leaders ever received. He became the first American president to be granted a second state visit, complete with the red carpet, a helicopter ride into London, and the promise of a royal welcome at Windsor Castle. It should have been a triumph, a reminder of prestige and tradition.
It's a great honor, and this one's at Windsor. They've never used Windsor Castle for this before, but basically I'm there also on trade.
Yet within minutes of his arrival, the story turned in a very different direction.
As Donald Trump arrives in London, so begins a charm offensive on an epic scale.
Protesters managed to project images of Trump with Jeffrey Epstein onto the ancient walls of Windsor Castle. What was supposed to be a symbol of respect and dignity became a global embarrassment. The trip was designed to showcase power and legitimacy. Instead, the opening act left an unforgettable stain. The president came to London seeking to shift the narrative away from domestic controversies and to bask in the splendor of Britain's monarchy. He spoke often of his friendship with King Charles and clearly believed that Windsor Castle, used for the first time as the centerpiece of a state visit, would elevate his image. The plan was simple: drown out criticism with pageantry. But optics are fragile. What people remember is not the lavish banquet or the guard of honor. They remember the projected images that spread instantly across social media. Instead of being portrayed as a statesman, Trump was mocked worldwide. It is striking that a leader who has built his political brand on control and dominance could see the narrative collapse so quickly. He can order tariffs that reshape world trade, but he could not stop a small projector from defining the moment.
Beyond the ceremony, the trip carried serious business. The United Kingdom is looking to adjust its trade arrangement with the United States. Trump hinted that London might get a slightly better deal, but there were no clear commitments. Britain has been struggling with the ripple effects of Washington's reciprocal tariff policy, which applies rates of 10 to 50% on a wide range of imports. For UK exporters in sectors like steel and aluminum, the pressure is real. That is why British officials wanted this visit to produce something more concrete. Yet the most significant economic news of the week did not come from the White House at all. It came from Microsoft. The company announced a $30 billion investment in the United Kingdom, the single largest financial commitment it has ever made there. The funds will expand data centers and support an advanced artificial intelligence supercomputer. For the UK, this is not just symbolism. It is a tangible boost to infrastructure, innovation, and jobs. And for observers, it underscored an awkward truth. While Trump tried to dominate headlines with royal splendor, the lasting legacy of the visit may belong to a technology giant.
By the time Air Force One departs, what will remain in the public memory is not the banquets or the photo opportunities. It will be the clash between the carefully staged theater of diplomacy and the raw disruption of a protester's projector. Britain may still push for trade relief, and the Microsoft deal will move forward regardless of political optics. But Trump's effort to reset his image abroad has been overshadowed. The visit was meant to be a charm offensive, proof of status and friendship. Instead, it showed how easily prestige can unravel. In the end, Windsor 2025 will not be remembered for the elegance of the monarchy. It will be remembered for how quickly ceremony gave way to humiliation, and how a simple beam of light managed to outshine the world's most powerful man.